Alright, well, this is my bad on this. I was supposed to record this thing, and I completely forgot as we were going through this. So let's just scan through this problem. Let's do this in a different color, though. Maybe I'll point out some things, alright? Maybe we'll point to see how many steps we did. You want to do that? I don't know. That might be scary just to count up how many steps this problem was. But let's see. So what's the first thing we did? First thing, we wanted to separate these square roots, didn't we? So I took this one, I added it, and I put it to that side. Would you consider that one step? Yeah. And then then we had this on this side. Then what's the next thing we did? We got rid of the square root by squaring both sides. Make sure you put parentheses around that second one right there. So that's 2 steps. And then let's see. I would consider all that one step right there. This is squared, so we have to FOIL it, right? So you FOIL it and you add like terms. You want to call that all one step. And yes, no. We'll call all this one step to get down to here. Is that all right? So what did? We FOILed it, and then we added like terms, and then we put as much stuff to the left-hand side as we could, right? So that was just basic algebra skills right there. So we'll call basic algebra skills 3 steps. Okay? And then here's some more basic algebra. So we got everything on the left-hand. Well, we don't have everything. We got all these constants over here on the left-hand side. And then what did we do? We divided both sides by 2. Now, if you wanted to, I tell you what, let's do this. Remember I said we could divide both sides by 2, or we could have just squared both sides right here. Let's just see what happens. This is like our alternate route, okay? Remember we came to a fork in the road? This is the other fork that we're going to take. So let's write the problem down again and say this. Let's say instead of dividing by 2, we could get rid of the square root by squaring this whole thing, right? But if I square that, I have to square this. We good? So what happens here? This is just x plus 1 times x plus 1 equals, now when you square this, this is technically not distributive property. It's only distributive property if I had a plus or a minus in between, all right? We're just squaring everything inside of this parentheses. I got 2 things basically inside this parentheses. I have a 2 times a square root. So if I square a 2, what do I get? I get a 4, right? And if I square the square root, what happens? That cancels it out. What am I left with? X plus 1. Now it's being multiplied by that 4, so there you go. So really, we could have gone directly from here to here instead of going through this stuff. So it probably was a little bit better doing it this way right here in pink. All right. So we'll say all that, and that, so we're all that, right? What I just did in pink up there, all that stuff right there we could have got rid of. So I think that might be a little easier. So that cuts down a couple steps for you. What are we on now anyway? What step? Next one's 4. Okay. So we'll say getting to this point right here is step 4. All right. Then what do? You just make it into a quadratic, right? We'll call that 5 steps. Right? We just FOILed this, distributed this, put everything on the left-hand side. We'll call that 1 step. Right? Even though it's probably more than like 2 steps. But we'll call it 1 major step. So now we have it into a quadratic. Once you do the quadratic, you factor, set them equal to 0, and you solve for x. So we'll call that 6 steps. But technically, well, I mean, technically we're kind of finished, aren't we? But we didn't know that these were the correct answer or not. So what did we do? We plugged them back in and checked them, okay, to see if they worked. So that I'll consider that another step, right? Because you got to make sure that you do that. And so we'll call that 7 steps. So there you go, the 7 steps of our of our problem. Now look, there's no way in the world you can just sit here and just watch me do this and just say, oh yeah, okay, I got it now. There's no way. You've got to practice it. You have to practice this problem. All right, so this same exact problem, I would do this on your own. I really would. So there you go. All right, let's do another problem. And then if we have time, I said you'd have time to work in class, but that problem took a lot longer than I anticipated. So let's do another one, and maybe we'll go back to one like that one we just did. We'll go through a little faster, but let's try this one. I don't think this one is near as long. So we're still solving. We're still solving for x. This looks a little bit different. The other one had square roots, right? This has a root as well, but it's written as an exponent. What root is this? It's to the 1/4 power, but it's the same thing as saying the what root? It's the 4th root. Remember doing that a long time ago? Yeah. Remember this, that the square root of x is x to the 1/2. The cube root of x is what? X to the 1/3. We'll stop here. The 4th root of x is x to the 1/4. Everybody got that? So what are we going to do? It's a 4th root, basically. So how do we get rid of a 4th root? Take it to the what? 4th power, right? Remember that? Because we had the square root. How did you get rid of a square root? Took it to the 2nd power. How would you get rid of a cube root? Take it to the 3rd power. So how are we going to get rid of this 4th root? Take it to the 4th power. And what allows us to do that? Well, as long as I do that to the other side, as long as I do it to both sides, I'm good to go. Right? Look what happens. What happens here? You have an exponent taken to another power. The rule is you multiply the exponents. What's 1/4 times 4? It's a 1. So they cancel each other out. That's the whole reason for doing that. Hope that makes sense to you. Now let's write down what we have left over. All that stuff canceled out, so I don't have anything else but that on this side. But now I have an x to the 4th, don't I? Looks a little bit like what we've done before, doesn't it? Do you remember doing stuff with x to the 4th and an x squared? Yeah, it's that substitution thing, right? We just finished doing a lesson like that. So let's do this. Since the x to the 4th is positive, let's move this over and let's move that over. Okay? So if we do that, I'm going to have an x to the 4th. I have to get rid of this by subtracting a 5x squared. So I subtract a 5x squared from both sides. That'll get rid of that. And then I have to get rid of this minus 6. So I do that by adding a 6 to both sides. And that's going to equal 0. I mean, I know what you're thinking. I put this on the right-hand side, but then I put it on the left-hand side. But it's still equal to 0, right? Even if I put this to the right-hand side, it's still equal to 0 over here. But then I switched it around just because I like this on the left. That's all. Now, what do we do here? This is one of those problems. We let something. And since we're already using x, yeah, let's use another letter. Let's use a. All right, we'll stay consistent with what we did before. Let a equal what? X squared, right? All right, and so we're going to rewrite this. So instead of x to the 4th, it's going to be x squared squared, which is a squared, minus 5. Remember, we let x squared equal a, so that's just an a, plus 6 equals 0. All right, and now we can factor this. All right, a and a, was it -3, -2, right? That multiplies to be 6 and adds up to be -5. I'll just show the step here. At this point, you probably should be able to do this in your head, but I'll show the step so you don't get confused. Add a 3 to both sides, so a is 3, and a is also 2. Now, before we circle that, that's not really our answer, is it? We're trying to solve for x, so we got to do that substitution back into this. So remember, a is equal to 3. Well, what was a equal to? X squared. So instead of a equals 3, we're going to say x squared equals 3. And instead of saying a equals 2, we're going to say x squared is equal to 2. Right? Now, how do we get x by itself? Square root. Okay, square root this, square root that. But what do we have now? It's not just a square root, it's what? Plus or minus square root of 3. Square root this, square root this. So x is also plus or minus the square root of 2. Now, you need to check this, all right? Because when you take something to a power, like right here, when you take this to the 4th power and this to the 4th power, I'm not going to go into any more explanation except to say that weird things happen sometimes, all right? You might have done all the steps right and everything was, really nice, but weird things happen in there when you square both sides or you cube both sides or you take both sides to the 4th power, whatever. So what we have to do is we got to check to see if it works. So let's copy this and then we'll put it down here. And let's get rid of a few things. Let's get rid of all the blue stuff here because that wasn't our original problem. Let's get rid of that, get rid of that, and get rid of that. Okay, here's our original problem. This is what we want to plug stuff into. So let's see if we can. It's really not quite as hard as what you would think. You think, how am I going to put a square root in for this? Well, what's it say to do? It says to square it, right? So it actually works out a little bit easier than what you would think. So it's 5 times x squared. Well, let's do the positive first. Actually, it works out either way. Let's do the square root of 3. Stick a square root of 3 in there. What's the square root of 3 squared? The square root of 3 squared is just a 3. That's right. So that just comes out to be a 3, doesn't it? Minus 6. But then I have to take that to the 1/4 power, or take it to the 4th root. It's the same thing. And let's see if that equals x, which would be what? Square root of 3. Okay? So let's do this. That's 15 minus 6, which is what? 9. Okay. So 9. And you want to take the 4th root of that, right? Well, what's the best way to do this? You could think of it this way. You could think of it as the square root of 9 and then the square root of that. Isn't that the 4th root? So what's the square root of 9? It's 3, right? And what's the square root of that? It's the square root of 3. Does the square root of 3 equal the square root of 3? Yes, it does. That was a weird checking. Okay, that was a little complicated. But that's how you could do it. You could always plug it into a calculator too if you wanted. But here's a problem. Remember we said this is plus or minus square root of 3? But look at this. Is there any way that this could equal a negative square root of 3? No. So guess what's not going to work here? The negative version of this. So even though we put plus or minus right here, the minus isn't going to work. What's the only thing that's going to work? The plus version. Right. So we're going to write x equals positive square root of 3. And the same thing would happen here with the square root of 2. You can go through that yourself if you want. So only the positive version is going to work here. Because if I take an even root, whether it's square root, 4th root, 6th root, whatever, it's always going to come out to a positive number. It'll never come out to a negative number. So there's no way that this will equal negative square root of 3. So we're not even going to include the negative. We're only going to include the positive. All right? So that's what your answer is right there. It's just positive square root of 3 and positive square root of 2. You can't put the plus or minus in front of it. Okay? All right. There's one more problem that they do. In this book, they don't give you an example. It's kind of weird. They don't give you an example, but they do give you problems to do like this. But they're problems that you've seen before, if I can find one in the book. Where did they go? Well, you got them on the worksheet. I got them from the same lesson. I might as well just give you one from the worksheet, right? It's stuff that you've seen before. That's crazy. I can't believe they don't have one like this in the book. But I'll just give you one from the worksheet. Here's what they tell you to do. They say solve, in this case, solve for S. And watch. It's A equals 6S squared. This shouldn't be that hard, okay? It's just getting rid of a square root. Or it's getting rid of a square by square rooting. You could do this a couple different ways. We want to get S by itself, right? So you could get rid of this by taking the square root, right? Or, yeah, I'd probably divide by 6 here. So it's A over 6 equals S squared. And you kind of had one like this on the test, didn't you, on the midterm? Square root both sides and square root this. Okay, put a plus or minus right there. That'll get rid of that. Can't leave it like that, can we? So it's plus or minus, what? Actually, yeah, we'll do it like that. Square root of A over square root of what? 6. How do I get rid of that square root of 6? Multiply the bottom and the top by the square root of 6 to simplify it, because remember I can't have a square root on the bottom. And then what do I get? I get plus or minus the square root. Now let's multiply these together. If they're both under a square root, I can just go what? 6a over square root of 6 times square root of 6 is just 6. And that's how you'd write that answer. So you do have several problems on this worksheet that look like this. For some reason in the book, they don't give you any like that. But on the computer program that the book supplies, I picked some problems from this section, and these were on there. So anyway, There you go. But that's really not much different. I mean, you had one almost identical to this on the midterm, so that shouldn't be new to you. All right. Well, that was a lot, wasn't it? And I thought it was going to be quick and easy. But what I want you to do, this is now on YouTube. Sorry, I didn't go through all the explanations to every step, with the recording. But we did go over it in class. It's right here in front of you, so you can always pause it, right, and take a look at the steps. You took notes on it. I'm telling you, you've got to practice this. You've got to, okay? And you're going to have several problems on here where you're going to have to do this stuff. All right, so I want you to work hard on this. Don't just blow this off. Do not just walk in tomorrow with a blank worksheet in front of you, writing down the answers as I read them off. I know some of you guys are doing that. Not everybody, not the majority, but there are several in here that are doing that. And you can't do that. Okay, you're not going to learn. You've got to put some time and you've got to put some effort into this. And many of you guys are. I can tell. I see all kinds of steps all over the paper. My suggestion is to not do this on the actual worksheet, is to do this on another sheet of paper, because you see how many steps there are. Okay, there's hardly any room at all in this worksheet to do all that stuff on the worksheet. So do this on another sheet of paper, just staple it to the worksheet tomorrow when you turn it in. All right, so we'll just click it off page by page. There's one page, there's another one. You can always pause it on YouTube just to look at the steps. There's another page, there's another one. There's another one. And at this point, again, you can just pause it and look at it and write it down. And there you go. And that's the last one for that. All the other ones we discussed together already. All right, everybody good? Let me give you the worksheet, and then we'll be finished.